Welcome everybody to another lecture. Today we're going to be talking about decisions database views and discussing what a database view is and how we use it in decisions. So the first thing we'll talk about is a database view. You can think of a database view as a quick and easy way to store a specific long query. So in decisions, there are many different tables that we have that have relationships. And so with those relationships, we can join those two tables together. And when you write a lot of joins, you can join multiple different tables together to get one long massive table. But the problem is whenever you want to display those join tables together, you have to write that multiple inner join query. What a view does in databases is you can say, hey, I have this long running inner join query or this long query that I need to be created so that an end user or someone else can just run one easy statement to get a generated table and view that. And so that's essentially what the view is. You run a couple of commands that say create view, and then your multiple inner join query can become a single statement of select asterisk from that table view, and then you can see all of the data that is related. Now, there's multiple ways that you can configure the create views inside of MS SQL. Now, this applies into other relational databases like Postgres, but we won't talk specifically about those views that we have and how to set up in Postgres. But most of the operations in the applications that support databases and the user connection to them, you can easily go to this views folder here in the case of MS SQL and create that view. What you also can do is you can also create views from the query perspective. There is a command inside of MS SQL or in any relational kind of database application where you can write SQL, the create view. And with the create view, you can write those queries and filter it by whatever you want it to be filtered by, or you can apply any other columns that you want to be displayed from those tables. So what you see here is an example of a query that creates a view based on a specific project inside of the module resources and element registration table. So instead of having to always write this inner join, what we do here is we say, hey, let's create a view that just automatically displays all of the designer elements and their project association, right? This is just an example on how to utilize that. And what we do is we use the create view command. Now, the cool thing about views is when you interact with them just like you would any database table. It acts and behaves like a database table. Now, not all views can be edited. The data within those views are at first a read-only field, and we won't talk specifically in this course how you make them an editable field where you can update the values in that view via query, but by default it is just a read-only view where you can see all those elements, but the way you interact with it is very similar like you would with any database table. You can query the specific columns, and you can see all of the columns that were configured in the view a couple of slides ago. So if I bounce back a couple of slides to this one, you see that in this view right here, we have this select element registration, component registration ID, and as ER, which in this case just stands for element registration, entity name as element name. And because that alias was configured inside of that view, when it is queried, you'll see that the first column there in that screenshot is element name. And so you can easily configure what columns that you want in your view by just adding that column when you create the view to begin with. You can also modify or replace views, and there's great articles online that kind of go around and explain how to do this. Essentially what you can do is you can use the create view command again and use the same name to alter the pre-existing view that already has this name. And that's how you can add and change any part of that view, whether you want to add more columns, whether you want to remove a certain column, have a different query represented by that view name, then you can use the create view. There is another one also called the replace view, and that's another command to change an SQL view, and you can easily use that command as well. If you want to remove a view, like you no longer need it and you want to get rid of it, then you can go ahead and drop the view by utilizing the drop view command. Pretty easy. Now, why would we want to use views? These seem like it's a part of databases that's not really needed. Well, the three big areas that it helps is it helps display disparate information, but the related tables are joined together so you can see all of that related information. So things like the designer elements and their associated projects. It also allows you to simplify queries, and you don't need to write multiple joins. And then the third thing, you can display important end user fields. Another thing that's important to know this is it has a decisions implementation. And one of the other reasons why we want to use views inside of decisions is it because it helps have your dashboards run in a more performant manner. Essentially what you're doing is you're going to say, hey, what we will do is we will go ahead and create this view, and that view is going to create all of the columns that you need in your database table view to be the data fields you can select in the report designer. And what this does is instead of utilizing like a flow and line field or any other type of non-performant report design, you can easily create this view in the database that decisions is connected against, and then you can integrate with that view, and then you'll have access to those columns. And you'll get the same experience in both version 8 and version 9, respectively. So there's no difference between the versions. It's just you click on Create Data Types and Integrations, go to Database Integrations, and then click the Add View portion there. Again, why do we want to do this? Database views will help create better end user reports, better end use performance, and since the join statements happen on the database level, it makes it more performant. So now let's talk about what it looks like in decisions before we wrap up. So let's go ahead and display this. So I'm going to demonstrate this in version 9. As stated earlier, both versions, the way to design it is the same. And so what I did is off screen, I created a view utilizing the create view command in the decisions database and SSMS SQL Server Management Studio. So I've already created that view utilizing those commands. So what I'm going to demonstrate is how do we utilize that command inside of decisions, or that view rather. So what we will do here is I'm going to go into my folder view here. I haven't converted all of my version 8 projects into version 9 projects, so I'm going to do a lot of this stuff from the folder view. First thing I'm going to go to is let me go to the example testing so we can see the view that I have. Actually, it's not in there. I think it's in, there we go, in the dynamic JSON test, right? Just a random project name for this demonstration. Now, if I go to create data types and integrations, and I click database integration, and I click add view, notice that the view that I can select is I can select the local connection of where it's from, and then there is a bunch of default decisions views that we have. So you can easily click one of these and grab it without creating your own custom ones. So that's a good thing to know. Views like what are missing dependencies in projects, if you're curious about what kind of missing dependencies that you have. The other thing that you can do is you can grab your own custom one. So let's say I decide to grab my own custom element view. You'll see that when I left click it, it will show you what this view is. And I'm going to rename this because I already have this configured in my environment. So I'm going to rename that view name. I can go ahead and designate which one is the key. I'm going to say that this component registration ID is the key. And then you can get all the flow steps, get by ID, and exists inside of that particular view. So depending on if you have the key or don't, you will lose access to certain steps. So you always want to make sure you define that key. All right, so let's go ahead and let's save this view and let's talk about how do we get access to this in the report designer. Boom. So now we have this project views by element and I have my projects view by element too. So I just have both the same view twice. How do I reference this view? Well, I'm going to go ahead and let's create a view test. Report, I'm going to use one of the default ones that I have, and I'm going to go ahead and click Add Data Sources. Now, when I click Add Data Sources, I'm going to go into, I believe it's the Common Area. Yeah, it's the Common Area folder. And then you want to expand the local connection. And when you expand the local connection, that's where you'll see all of your different views. So in this case, I'm going to grab my DBO projects by element view, and it reports it just like it's a user-defined type, just like it's any other database integration, like if I was getting data from the address database back in one of our sprint builds. When I have this selected, notice the filters will be aware of what the entity filters are and what the field filters are that you have within this specific view. And the data fields that I have selected are all of the data fields that I have configured inside of that view. So when I created the view in the screenshot in the presentation, those are the column names that I will have access to when I create the data field options right here. And then let's go ahead and add some of those so you can see. And when I add those, you'll see that now I get to see the designer element name and also the project name it is associated with. And this view is a join statement between the element registration table and the module resource table. And because I have those things joined in that view, I have access to those fields and only those fields that I'm interested in viewing. Thank you so much. That concludes our database views lecture.